What if a single sacred message, whispered by hands covered in ochre and ash, was the only thing standing between early human children and the dangers that hunted them in the dark? This question alone forces us to step into the mind of our earliest ancestors, those who lived in a world shaped by fear, instinct, ritual, and an unbreakable spiritual connection to the unseen forces around them. When we try to understand their symbolic messages, we are not simply studying history. We are entering a realm where survival depended on intuition, where every gesture carried meaning, and where spirituality was woven into the very act of keeping a family alive. Imagine the weight of a mother's breath as she pressed her hand against a stone wall, leaving a mark meant to shield her child. Imagine the silent tension of a father scanning the shadows, trusting a symbol more than his own voice. These people lived with a heightened awareness, a raw consciousness that modern humanity often forgets. Yet, their messages remain, carved and painted, waiting for us to uncover what they were desperately trying to express. As we move deeper into this narrative, we begin to feel how ancestral spirituality shaped not only their decisions, but also their understanding of danger. For them, every sound in the night could be a predator, every shift in the wind a supernatural warning. They did not separate the physical world from the spiritual one. A mark on a cave wall was not decoration. It was a barrier, a prayer, a psychological anchor that held fear at bay. And when we ask ourselves how these symbols protected their children, we enter a dialogue with minds that lived thousands of years before written language, yet understood the power of meaning far better than we do today. You may even notice that certain sensations arise as you picture these ancient scenes. Have you ever felt an instinct that you could not explain, a subtle pull as if something older than memory was trying to guide you? What you discover next might shift the way you see every ancestral mark left on stone. Before we continue, share whether you have ever sensed this kind of ancestral intuition. Your experience matters here. Leave a comment with your own feeling about this connection. Hit the like button to support this exploration and check if you are already subscribed so you do not miss the unfolding of this story as we move forward into its deeper layers, letting the next revelation emerge naturally from the shadows of the past. As we move deeper into the world of those early ancestors, the origin of the protective symbol becomes clearer, not as an artistic invention, but as a response to a reality shaped by constant threat. Danger was not merely a physical presence, it was an atmosphere, a force woven into the environment. In this landscape, the earliest humans discovered that meaning could be shaped by gesture, and gesture could become a tool of survival. When a mother traced a spiral with her finger in the dirt, she was not simply marking the ground. She was invoking a memory, a belief passed forward from generations before her, a belief that the spiral echoed the movement of life itself. The spiral was continuity, a reminder that what protected one generation could protect the next. And as the children watched, they began to understand that shapes could hold power long before they knew the concept of writing. These symbols did not appear randomly. They emerged from intense observation of nature. Early humans watched the shifting patterns of the sky, the migrations of animals, the circling movements of predators, the cycles of fire and light. From these patterns came the first spiritual interpretations, the belief that nature itself was speaking to them. The message they received was not born of fear alone, but of a profound sense of relationship between their lives and the movements of the world around them. A curved line might remind them of the moon's path. A cluster of dots might echo the night sky. These marks allowed them to externalize the invisible, giving shape to forces they felt but could not name. Over time, these shapes evolved into sacred guidance. The protective symbol believed to shield children from danger likely began as a replication of a recurring pattern in nature, something that the ancestors witnessed repeatedly during moments of survival. Perhaps it mirrored the posture of a defensive animal. Perhaps it echoed the swirling motion of smoke, which they observed rising safely upward while flames consumed the ground below. Or perhaps it was inspired by movements they performed instinctively when danger approached. Whatever its origin, it became a psychological anchor, something that reassured the mind and refocused fear into intention. The act of marking the symbol created an emotional shift, guiding parents to act with clarity rather than panic. These early humans learned that danger responded not only to physical action, but also to emotional state. A calm mind made better decisions. A focused parent could sense subtle changes in the environment. Thus, the symbol became more than protection. It became preparation. When they carved it near the entrance of a shelter or painted it on an object close to the children, it resonated with the entire community. It reminded them of the ancient connection between instinct and meaning, between danger and awareness, between fear and the tools they created to counter it. And as we continue this journey, the deeper layers of this sacred message begin to emerge, revealing how much more these ancestors understood about the unseen world than we often imagine. As we travel further into the mind of early humanity, we begin to understand that danger for them was not limited to predators or environmental threats. Much of what frightened these ancestors was invisible, unpredictable, and deeply tied to their understanding of the spiritual world. They believed that danger could move like a shadow, crossing the boundary between the physical and the unseen without warning. To survive, they needed not only physical skill, but also psychological awareness, a kind of ancient intuition sharpened by countless generations living in close contact with the rhythms of nature. When a child suddenly cried at night, when birds fell silent at dusk, when the wind shifted direction unexpectedly, these were not coincidences to them. They were signals, messages carried through the environment that required interpretation. This worldview shaped how they perceived threat long before they articulated fear as an emotion. Their senses were far more alert than ours, trained by necessity. Every sound became a clue. Every flicker of light carried meaning. They noticed patterns we would overlook, the pause in an animal's movement, the hesitation of fire before a gust of wind, the trembling of leaves without a breeze. These subtle cues formed the foundation of their spiritual psychology. The unseen was never separate from daily life. It existed within every shadow, every echo, every instinctive reaction. And because children were seen as closer to the spiritual world, more sensitive to its changes, protecting them required understanding danger on both a physical and symbolic level. What makes this even more compelling is how these ancestors translated their perceptions into rituals and symbols that helped them process fear. They believed that invisible forces often targeted children because they were vulnerable, unshaped by the experiences that hardened adults. To prevent this, adults watched the environment with heightened attention, interpreting silence, movement, and even the emotional states of others as indicators of approaching threat. When something felt wrong, they responded not only with physical readiness, but also with symbolic action. The protective mark became a guide that allowed them to name the invisible threat and regain a sense of control over forces they could not see. This ability to interpret subtle cues created a kind of collective intelligence. Communities learned to share these observations through gesture, expression, and ritualized behaviors. When one person sensed danger, others felt it through the shift in their posture or voice. It is likely that this shared awareness inspired the spiritual messages passed from one generation to the next, messages meant to protect the young by teaching adults how to read the environment intuitively. Over time, this knowledge became encoded in symbols, gestures, and practices that carried meaning far beyond their literal form. What might look to us like a simple line or shape on a stone was, to them, the embodiment of a warning understood by every member of the group. And so, as we deepen our understanding of these early humans, we start to see how their interpretation of the invisible laid the groundwork for the rituals that would one day define entire cultures. Their awareness was not superstition. It was survival shaped into meaning, intuition transformed into guidance, and fear woven into the fabric of their spiritual identity. The deeper we move into their world, the clearer it becomes that the ritual protecting their children was not merely a symbolic practice, but a structured response formed from generations of lived experience. In a time before language as we know it, these ancestors relied on repeated gestures, synchronized movements, and subtle communal actions to transmit essential knowledge. The ritual was quiet, deliberate, and performed with a seriousness that reflected its importance. When night approached or the environment felt unstable, parents would gather near the shelter's entrance, drawing the sacred symbol alongside a series of smaller marks that acted as reminders of steps to follow. These marks functioned like an ancestral map, guiding the community through a sequence that prepared both body and mind for the invisible threats outside. The ritual itself involved more than marking the symbol. Adults often held their children close, pressing their palms gently against their backs, aligning their breathing with theirs. This created a shared rhythm meant to steady the child's energy, reinforcing to the community that the youngest members were being anchored spiritually. At the same time, elders positioned themselves near key points of the shelter, observing shadows and wind movement with remarkable focus. Each position had meaning, and each individual had a responsibility built into the ritual. These roles were not imposed, but inherited, a continuation of patterns that had protected generations before them. As the ritual unfolded, an atmosphere of heightened awareness took shape. The community understood that danger was not only external, fear itself could fracture their stability. The ritual countered this by creating unity, allowing every participant to feel that they were part of a protective circle. When parents traced the symbol on the ground or on a stone surface, they were reactivating a message that had been passed down through countless lifetimes. They were reminding themselves of a protocol that guided their responses when uncertainty clouded the world around them. The children, though too young to comprehend, absorbed the emotional tone of the ritual. They felt the tension shift into focus, the fear transform into intention. The ritual's power came from repetition. Each performance reinforced neural pathways long before anyone understood such concepts. It conditioned the adults to remain alert without falling into panic, and it taught them to read the environment not through isolated signals, but through patterns. When danger eventually approached, whether through a prowling predator or a sudden change in the air, the community was already synchronized, already functioning as one organism. The ritual ensured that the children were kept close, watched over, and guided to the safest part of the shelter without hesitation. This was not superstition. It was an ancestral form of psychological coherence, an early method of harmonizing instinct and action. As you picture this moment, imagine the weight of those gestures and how deeply they shaped survival. If something in this ritual resonates with you, or if a detail awakens a memory or intuition, share your thoughts below. Your perception adds another layer to this exploration, helping us uncover how these ancient messages still echo in the way we respond to danger today. As the ritual became part of their daily rhythm, another layer of ancestral wisdom emerged, the transmission of knowledge through gestures and marks. Long before structured language formed, these early humans relied on nonverbal symbols to preserve essential teachings. Every gesture, every carved line, every handprint carried a story that children absorbed simply by watching. It was through this silent method that survival, knowledge passed from one generation to the next. The young learned not by instruction, but by imitation. They observed how an adult positioned a hand over the sacred mark, how a finger traced the edges of a symbol meant to ward away danger, how objects were placed with intention near the entrance of a shelter. These details became their first form of education. The power of these gestures was rooted in repetition. A child who saw their parent draw a curved shape in the dirt each night would eventually learn when and why that action mattered. Even the youngest members of the community could sense the shift in atmosphere when these rituals began. Their awareness sharpened, not through fear, but through familiarity with the sequence of movements. These early humans understood instinctively what modern psychology confirms. Repeated physical action rewires the mind, creating pathways that shape understanding long before words appear. In this way, the marks and gestures created a shared vocabulary that united the group. Beyond the gestures themselves, the marks left on stone surfaces served as memory anchors. Many of these carved shapes appear simple to us now, but they were layered with meaning. A straight line might represent a boundary not to be crossed. A broken line could symbolize disrupted safety. A circle often indicated unity or protection. When combined, these forms created a message that the entire community recognized instantly. These marks were their first textbooks, their earliest archives of lived experience. They recorded the dangers encountered by previous generations, the methods that kept children safe, and the beliefs that guided responses to the unknown. Over time, these marks evolved with the environment. If a new threat emerged, the design changed slightly to reflect it. The community adapted the marks to match their observations, refining them like a living language. The children grew up surrounded by these shapes, internalizing their meanings on a level that transcended conscious thought. They could sense when a mark indicated caution, when it signaled calm, or when it conveyed a need for collective action. What is remarkable is how effectively these early systems conveyed complex information without a single spoken word. They functioned as both spiritual symbols and psychological tools. This mode of transmission formed the foundation of ancestral education. It ensured that even if individuals were lost, their knowledge remained. The marks endured through seasons, storms, and migrations, becoming quiet guardians of memory. As we follow these traces deeper into the past, the symbolic universe of our ancestors expands, revealing how meaning was shaped not by language, but by the movements of hands, the patterns on stone, and the shared intention to keep their children safe in a world filled with uncertainty. As the marks and gestures shaped their collective understanding, another truth emerged within early communities. The profound emotional bond between parents and their children was not only a personal connection, but also a spiritual force believed to influence the world around them. In those ancient societies, the relationship between adults and their young was seen as a living thread, something delicate yet powerful enough to affect the balance of safety and danger. Parents observed that children responded not just to physical cues, but to the emotional energy of the group. A calm parent produced a calm child, and a calm child meant fewer disturbances that could attract predators or other unseen threats. This understanding became part of their spiritual psychology, merging instinct with meaning. In many ways, the ancestors believed that the child carried an echo of the natural world within them. Their innocence, their sensitivity, and their unpredictability made them both precious and vulnerable. Because of this, adults saw themselves not merely as protectors, but as channels through which stability could flow. A mother's hand placed on a child's chest, a father's quiet hum during moments of tension, even the synchronized breathing created during nighttime rituals were more than acts of comfort. They were methods of aligning emotional frequencies, grounding the child in a world filled with shadows and uncertainty. These practices reinforced the belief that emotional harmony directly affected physical survival. This bond extended beyond individual families. Communities treated children as collective responsibility, recognizing that their survival determined the future of the group. When a child became restless or frightened, adults interpreted these reactions as signs worth considering. A sudden cry in the night might signal more than discomfort. It could reflect a disruption in the environment. Children, with their heightened sensitivity, were seen as receivers of subtle cues that adults sometimes overlooked. Their reactions were studied carefully, becoming part of the early warning system that shaped decisions and rituals. This attentiveness strengthened the link between emotional states and perceived danger. Over generations, these observations formed a deep belief that the emotional world and the physical world were interconnected. When fear spread within the community, it created vulnerability. When calmness prevailed, the group moved with clarity and purpose. Because of this, parents and elders devoted themselves to maintaining emotional balance, understanding that the smallest shift could alter the entire group's ability to survive. Their rituals, symbols, and practices were all designed to reinforce this inner equilibrium, ensuring that the bond between adults and children remained strong and steady. The result was a sophisticated form of ancestral psychology, one that recognized the interplay between emotion, intuition, and environment long before these ideas had names. Their protective rituals were not merely symbolic. They were grounded in a profound comprehension of human connection. As we continue to explore their sacred messages, this emotional foundation becomes the key to understanding how entire communities moved in harmony with forces both visible and hidden, shaping practices that would echo through countless generations. As the emotional bonds within the community deepened, another element emerged that shaped their understanding of safety. The perception that certain warnings were not created by individuals, but carried through the group as a kind of spiritual signal. This collective intuition grew stronger with each generation, guided by the belief that the world itself communicated with them. When elders sensed a shift in the environment, or when a child reacted with sudden discomfort, the entire community interpreted these moments as part of a larger message. These subtle warnings were not dismissed, but woven into the rituals that governed their nights, their migrations, and the sacred symbols protecting their young. The warning often took the form of atmospheric changes that only the most attuned individuals noticed. A sudden stillness in the forest, a faint vibration in the ground, or the unnatural silence of birds were all read as indicators that unseen forces were approaching. To the ancestors, the invisible realm was not separate from their reality. It existed alongside them, shaping the flow of events. They believed that danger rarely arrived without first sending hints, and these hints became the spiritual backbone of their protective practices. By observing these signs collectively, the community amplified its awareness, using shared perception as an early warning system. In moments when uncertainty intensified, the protective symbol gained an even deeper purpose. Adults would gather near the designated stone or carved surface, interpreting the arrangement of marks like a map of emotional and environmental shifts. The symbol was not only a reminder of past wisdom, but also a living tool, updated by the experiences of each generation. When warnings grew stronger, elders might add a new line or variation to the mark, signaling that the group must remain especially vigilant. Children watched these moments with wide eyes, absorbing the seriousness and recognizing that the symbol was constantly evolving, just like the world around them. This communal awareness allowed early humans to act in unity when danger approached. Instead of reacting chaotically, they followed patterns rehearsed through ritual and memory. They positioned themselves strategically around the shelter, secured the entrances, soothed the children, and prepared themselves spiritually for whatever force might draw near. Even without spoken language, the group moved with a precision that seems remarkable today. Their reliance on shared intuition created a kind of ancestral radar, an ability to sense threat long before it manifested physically. What stands out most is how deeply they trusted these warnings. Their belief in the interconnectedness of emotion, environment, and spirit helped them identify patterns we might overlook. They did not dismiss instinct as superstition. They saw it as a lifeline. And as these ancient messages continued to evolve, the community learned to read danger not only with their eyes, but with their entire being, forming a spiritual discipline that shaped every aspect of their lives. If this idea of a collective ancestral warning resonates with you, share your thoughts in the comments. Sometimes your own intuition carries echoes of something far older than you realize. As the ancestral warnings took shape within the community, the marks carved into stone began to reveal deeper layers of meaning, acting as both memory and message. These carvings were not simple decorations. They were deliberate inscriptions designed to preserve knowledge that words could not hold. Over time, the stones became repositories of collective experience, each etched line representing dangers encountered, instincts followed, and children protected. To an untrained eye, the shapes might appear abstract, but to the ancestors, they were as clear as spoken instruction. They understood how to trace history through patterns, reading the stones as one might read a map of the spirit world. The process of creating these marks was itself a ritual. Elders, chosen for their ability to interpret subtle shifts in the environment, carried the responsibility of updating the stones. With sharpened bone or stone tools, they carved lines that recorded not just events, but emotions and insights gained during moments of crisis. A deep vertical groove might represent a night of fear when danger came close. A cluster of short scratches could mark a migration forced by environmental change. Circular shapes often reflected unity, a reaffirmation that the group had survived together. Through repetition, these symbols became embedded in the community's identity, shaping their worldview and influencing their actions. Children learned to understand these markings long before they grasped the complexities of human speech. They were encouraged to run their fingers along the grooves, feeling the depth and texture as a way to absorb the story held within. Over time, they developed intuitive recognition, responding instinctively to the symbols even if they could not fully explain their meaning. This physical interaction created a tangible connection between generations. It ensured that the wisdom of the past was not lost, even if elders were no longer there to explain it. The stones became the bridge through which memory flowed, preserving the psychological and spiritual foundations of the community. Through this evolving system, the ancestors established a form of communication that operated simultaneously on physical, emotional, and spiritual levels. The marks captured the cycles of danger and safety, the rise and fall of fear, the moments when vigilance saved lives. They reflected the lived experience of people who understood that survival required constant adaptation. When environmental conditions shifted or when predators changed their patterns, new symbols emerged. The stones grew crowded over the years, forming layered messages that recorded not only the external world, but also the internal landscape of the community's mind. What makes these ancient markings particularly striking is their consistency across regions separated by vast distances. Similar shapes appear in caves and shelters far from one another, suggesting that early humans shared a universal understanding of symbolic protection. Whether by instinct, migration, or shared memory, they arrived at common visual languages. This widespread appearance hints at a deeper truth. The desire to protect children, to preserve life, and to communicate warnings was not limited to one group. It was a shared expression of humanity itself, a testament to how deeply the need for safety shaped the earliest forms of spiritual meaning. As these markings continued to evolve, they guided behavior, shaped ritual, and reinforced the belief that messages carved in stone could speak across generations, offering protection and insight long after the original hands had turned to dust. As we reflect on how these markings spread across generations, a deeper question emerges. Why did this particular message endure when so many others faded into obscurity? The answer lies not in the symbols themselves, but in the psychological and spiritual role they played for the communities that relied on them. These marks survived because they addressed a universal fear that transcended geography and time, the fear of losing a child to forces beyond human control. Whether danger came from predators, environmental changes, or the unseen energies they believed moved through the world, the ancestors recognized that protection required more than physical action. It required a shared belief, a collective understanding that survival depended on unity, awareness, and the continuity of sacred knowledge. This message endured because it shaped behavior in a way that strengthened the group. The protective symbol was not simply an artifact. It was a method of training the mind to remain alert, of directing emotional energy toward focus rather than panic. It became a psychological anchor that helped early humans regulate fear in environments where uncertainty was constant. Parents felt empowered by marking the symbol, knowing they were participating in a legacy that had safeguarded countless children before theirs. This emotional reinforcement made the symbol more resilient than spoken language, which changed with time and migration. Meaning carved into stone does not erode as quickly as stories passed through memory. The endurance of the message also reveals how deeply the ancestors understood the connection between human emotion and environmental perception. They may not have had the words to describe intuition, pattern recognition, or collective awareness, but they recognized these phenomena in practice. The symbol preserved these insights, allowing generations to respond instinctively to danger even without conscious understanding. This is why the message persisted across different regions and cultures. It spoke to something fundamental within the human experience: the need to create order from uncertainty, to give shape to fear, and to transform instinct into intention. Another reason the message survived is its adaptability. Each generation modified the symbol slightly, adding new lines or shapes that reflected their own experiences. Yet the core meaning remained intact. This flexibility made the symbol a living system rather than a fixed relic. It evolved with the community, absorbing new knowledge while preserving ancestral wisdom. In this way, the message bridged the gap between past and present, allowing people separated by centuries to understand one another through shared visual language. Perhaps the most powerful reason the symbol endured is its emotional resonance. Every carved line contained the stories of parents who stayed awake through the night, listening for shifts in the wind. Every handprint carried the weight of hope for a child's safety. These emotions were etched into the stone as much as the markings themselves, creating a record not of events alone, but of human experience. Long after the individuals disappeared, the emotional energy embedded in the symbol remained. It spoke silently to those who came after, reminding them that they were part of a lineage stretching back to the dawn of human awareness. This is why the message survived for thousands of years. It held the essence of what it meant to protect life in a world where danger was ever present, shaping the way entire communities perceived the sacred responsibility of safeguarding their children. As we reach the final layer of this ancestral message, the true weight of what the early humans left behind becomes clearer. Their symbols, rituals, and warnings were never meant to be static artifacts. They were messages meant to travel across time, guiding not only their descendants, but anyone capable of sensing the echoes of ancient intuition. These markings were a bridge linking the living to those who had long vanished, a reminder that the fear of losing a child, The impulse to protect and the desire to understand the unseen are experiences that shaped humanity from its earliest breath. What they carved into stone was not a mere instruction. It was an inheritance of awareness. It carried the memory of nights spent listening to the forest, of hands trembling as they marked the sacred shape, of communities holding their children close when shadows shifted outside their shelters. The endurance of this message reveals something remarkable about the human spirit. Even without written language, the ancestors found ways to communicate emotional truth. They understood that survival was more than reacting to danger. It was maintaining a connection to something larger than themselves. Their symbols helped regulate fear, unify communities, and prepare minds for uncertainty. And in doing so, they discovered a form of spirituality rooted not in myth alone, but in the lived psychological experience of navigating a world filled with ambiguity. Their messages invite us to imagine what it felt like to interpret every gust of wind as a potential sign, every silence in the night as a warning, every carved line as guidance from those who came before. What makes this heritage so powerful is its quiet persistence. Even now, when we look at an ancient symbol, something within us stirs, a sense that meaning has been carried forward through hands we will never know. These symbols remind us that we are not separate from the people who painted their fears and hopes onto cave walls. We are extensions of their consciousness, shaped by the same instincts, the same desire to protect what we love, the same search for understanding in a world that often feels unpredictable. Their sacred messages still whisper beneath the surface of modern life. They remind us that intuition matters, that awareness matters, that the emotional bonds we form echo through time, just as theirs once did. If you reached this point and felt this story resonate with something inside you, let that feeling be part of the message they intended to leave behind. Share a comment with the phrase, "This message was for me, so I know you walked through every step of this ancestral path." And if this exploration offered you value, consider subscribing so you can continue uncovering the hidden layers of our shared human past. A like helps this story reach others who might need to reconnect with the deeper roots of human experience. And if you want to keep traveling through this world of ancient intuition, there is another video waiting that expands these ideas in a new direction. Click on it and continue this journey with me as we follow the traces our ancestors left behind.